Soos genoem gesels ek met Wandile Sihlobo, 'n ekonoom van Agbiz, en ons praat oor die palmolie kwessie. Wandile, thank you so much for joining me, not in studio, but virtually. You're welcome here.
Thanks for having me on, Mia.
Can you firstly paint me a picture of the situation regarding the palm oil at the moment? How are things looking?
Yeah, palm oil is one of the most important vegetables oils in the world, used for a range of products, both on industrial and also on the human consumption side. But I mean, on its production, though, it's largely within Asia. For example, Indonesia and Malaysia produce more than 2/3 of the global palm oil exports. So if you look at the export figures, they really dominate that market. Along with that, obviously, we do have other important vegetable oils. If you think of sunflower, you think of canola, but I would say palm oil is one of the important ones. At the moment, though, the supplies are constrained. Part of the reason is the drought that was experienced in Indonesia and Malaysia. And of course, when you look at other vegetable oil like sunflower seed, the issues there are related to the war in the Ukraine and the disruptions thereafter on production and logistics.
If you can give me a bit of background, where exactly does South Africa stand when it comes to palm oil and the farming thereof?
South Africa is a net importer of palm oil. We don't really have the favorable climatic conditions to be at a point where we can produce palm oil. So we rely heavily on imports. A year, for example, we're importing just under 500,000 tons of palm oil. But if you look at to say, where are our palm oil imports coming from, you'll realize that about 66% of it is imported from Indonesia. Then you have the remainder coming out of Malaysia. So we're really concentrated in those two countries, and we remain net importers of that. It comes into South Africa, Mia, to supplement the needs on the human consumption, but also we are heavy on the industrial use of it.
Now, how, with this news, did it actually took place, and how will South Africa directly be impacted? I mean, how are we going to feel the consequences, the man on the street?
Yeah, I mean, everyone since last Friday, when the president of Indonesia came out and said they are banning the exports of palm oil. So there's been a general panic, I think, across the world. But I think we will have, over the next coming days, try to understand that, are they banning overall palm oil exports, or are they leaving crude and maybe banning the refined one? So there is some nuance that is coming up in there that we are still trying to understand. But I think the bottom point is, if in a year where vegetable oil in general are constrained, vegetable oil supply in the market because of sunflower issues in the Ukraine and Russia, and additionally the drought I had mentioned. So any stoppage or curb of the exports brings upward pressure on prices globally, and of course South Africa gets to be impacted through those channels. And I think to the man on the streets, then in the coming weeks and months, that's where some of the people will see those price increases creeping up on vegetable oil products.
You're right, there is a panic on the ground. Obviously, people are panicking because prices are so high. Is it going to keep on rising? How do you predict things are going to play out?
I think we are generally in a space where global agricultural prices are rising. The stocks of a range of commodities across the grains, across the vegetable oil, are somewhat really constrained. And I think the effects of the war, while they initially, of course, led to the spike in prices, I think those higher prices will last for some time. And I think that's what you will see happening in the palm oil side, because you remember the palm oil price increases are not only affected or influenced by the supplies only of palm oil, but also of saying what is happening across other vegetable oil supplies that could be used as substitute. Now you have those whereby Russia and Ukraine makes up about roughly 60% or so of sunflower oil exports. And they are out of the market for quite some time until the issues of the war and the rebuilding begins. And then that on its own was an upside a factor for the prices. And then additionally now, the droughts in Indonesia and this curb on exports, it just brings up furthermore upside risks on the prices. And I think for the year, that's what you could expect prices to remain elevated.
You talked about alternatives. We've got just about 2 minutes left. Alternatives, because is this only bad news, or is it more like people are making a plan, alternative plan?
I think, Mia, for South Africa, we are at least a comfortable position in a sense that this year, we are expecting the second largest sunflower harvest in the history of the country, just over 900,000 tons of that sunflower harvest. That is going to help us to somewhat offset some of the shortages that we typically have and needing to import a lot of oil. For the consumer, then that sends a signal that we might actually not be in a position where we'll run out of oil or anything. It's just that the prices might be slightly elevated compared to the typical levels. Secondly, in the Western Cape, the guys are starting to plant at the moment. And I think that the higher prices in general in vegetable oils, they will incentivize those that are in the canola production to somewhat slightly increase their planting. And we do see that on the intentions to plant data. So I think we are not at all at a fairly bad position as South Africa. Farmers tend to benefit. And as I say, in the Western Cape, we expect plantings to increase. And also we have no shortage in South Africa, at least over the foreseeable future.
That's really good news. That's really good news. Wandile, just stay where you are. Ons is nou weer terug. Ons sien jou nou. Welkom terug. Ek gesels met Wandile Sihlobo en ons gesels oor die palmolie amper krisis of situasie in Suid-Afrika. Now, Wandile, welcome once again. If we can talk about the bigger picture, agriculture in general at the moment, how are things looking for farmers after the floods, after the drought and so?
Yeah, I would say at the moment, we really have a mixed picture in South Africa in as far as the agricultural conditions. From a farmer's side, we started off the season with the worries that we might have a really bad crop when we were receiving excessive rains since about October throughout into mid-January. And I think the worry was that bad crop and also reduced plantings. But I think the guys at the end of January, they really went back to the fields and ensured that they are replanting in areas which had experienced some damages, to an extent that at this point, when we look at the summer crop harvest that we have, it is just down about 7% or so on a year-on-year basis, still having a fairly good crop. So I would say for the farmers in that perspective of an output, we're looking well. And I think the numbers are also looking encouraging. If you were to look in the wine industry, you're looking at the horticulture industry, the output numbers are encouraging. But of course, these harvests come at a cost, because by the time farmers began planting, input costs were elevated, fertilizer prices were plus 60% on a year-on-year basis. So it's been a difficult environment, but I think it's a mixed picture.
We can't talk about this topic without mentioning fuel prices going up. What do you think farmers can expect in the coming months? Are things going to look a little bit more dark?
I think in as far as the fuel and the range of the inputs, much really depends on how the war in the Ukraine turns out to be. Because, I mean, as the war continues, and as the sanctions remain on Russia, then that tells us that in as far as the fertilizer and the fuel and in fact, all of the agricultural input costs, they're likely to remain elevated, except of course, some of the OPEC countries, Saudi Arabia's and the others decide to increase their oil production. Under such circumstances, then we could see fuel prices somewhat softening. But in general, our baseline view at Agbiz is that input costs will remain elevated for some time.
Do you have any words of encouragement for people in the agriculture sector at the moment?
I think, I mean, as agriculture, we are in a sector that is essential there's really nothing that can be done without the efforts to produce food and all of the other products that are necessary for livelihood. So it will be a tough time for the farmers, but I think everyone understanding that they are in an essential business, they might continue. Of course, one will have to look back and looking at their input costs, where can they cut while at the same time still managing to receive fairly good yields. So it will really be about managing your costs wisely. But I think to an extent, those that are in grains and to an extent the vegetable oils will still receive a better cash for their crop as commodity prices are elevated. But I think let's manage the input costs very wisely. It's a tough one. It's easy for me to say at the office, but I think it's really the one thing that one can manage.
And when we look at the flood damage that's happened in KwaZulu-Natal, how big is that damage at the moment? Have you got any latest news on that?
On the damage in KZN, of course, you will know that province is big on sugar, it's big on dairy, horticulture like macadamia and the others. So it's a major producer of a range of commodities. So far, our colleagues from the Cane Growers Association tells us that their farmers have experienced losses of around about 220 million rands, sure. But that's only just the cane growers side. We are still trying to understand the impact in other crops as well as within the horticultural sector. But I think the most important thing here, the intervention in KZN will need to be on the infrastructure side. And this needs not to only end up in KZN, but really across the country, because one of the weaknesses of South Africa over the past few years was the poor maintenance of the rural roads. And these are critical on ensuring that we have a vibrant agriculture and the agribusiness environment. So infrastructure, management of the municipality are the key thing as we rebuild in KZN and across South Africa.
And what is the latest on the Durban Port at the moment?
In the Durban Port, I mean, one thing we can say now is also just to applaud Transnet and the others. As we know, that is a most important port in the African continent. And Transnet, in the past couple of days, they really worked hard on ensuring that they find alternative routes. As of course everyone have seen the damages on the Bayhead Road that connects inland to the container harbor. So right now they've managed to do that, found alternative route. The port is operational, although not fully efficient. But I think the time frame at which they took to make sure that we are back on business on that port is something to be commendable. And that private sector public partnership that we saw there is something that we should see across the country as we rebuild.
Any final words from your side on the agriculture sector at the moment?
On the agricultural sector in general, from our side, we see, for example, contraction in how the sector will perform this year of between 3% and 5%. But I think this will largely be the base effect of last year. Things are not as bad when it comes to the output side. And I think as we go forward as the sector, let's try to find any PPP approaches, joint venture approaches, where government, private sector, and other stakeholders can come together and ensure that this sector continues to do well and contribute positively to economic conditions in South Africa and job creation.
Wandile, I appreciate your time. Thank you for your knowledge and thank you for joining me on Groot. Have a good day.
Thank you.
Newater is 'n slim waterbehandelingsoplossingsmaatskappy wat wêreldwyd hoëgehalte oplossings bied. Newater se watersuiweringsaanlegte is funksioneel met min onderhoud en waarborg volhoubare watervoorraad teen die hoeveelheid en kwaliteit wat benodig word. Die innoverende tegnologie is deur Newater ontwerpers en ingenieurs ontwikkel vir optimale herwinning. Die vermindering van kapitaalkoste vir die eindverbruiker is 'n sleuteldoelwit van die New Thinking filosofie. Vir meer inligting besoek newater.com vandag nog. Nou, ons is weer aan die einde van die program. Dankie dat jy ingeskakel het. Stuur vir my 'n e-pos by info@grootplaas.co.za. Maar die belangrikste is, hê 'n wonderlike dag verder.